Just to begin, how ambitious were you in those very early days when you started at Motown? Did you aspire to stardom?
Oh, since I was the age of 3, my mom has encouraged me to sing. She taught me to retain lyrics, and I was featured in my grandfather's church nearly every Sunday. So singing was a part of my life and just something that I always wanted to do. As I matured, I realized that there was an economic condition that needed assisting. My dad worked for the city of Detroit. My mom she mothered 12 children, she and my dad. So as the first girl born in the family, I realized I needed to make a living too. So I saw that there was an opportunity to not only make money, but do something that I really enjoyed doing, and pursued a recording contract from my high school days. I've been was a part of a group from the 9th grade on. I sang in the choirs in school, was featured as a soloist at my graduation upon graduating, and just knew that I had talent and wanted to pursue it. So yes, I would say I've been ambitious about singing all my life.
What were your first impressions of the Motown organization when you first got there?
When I was given a card and asked to come to Hitsville, USA, I realized they had artists like Mary Wells and Barrett Strong and Marva Johnson, and a group called the Marvelettes that lived in Inkster. They had a group called the Miracles, and everybody was going head over heels for Smokey Robinson, the lead singer. They thought he was the cutest. It was making a whole lot of news locally, the Motown company. So upon arrival, I looked for this big conglomerate, and it was a house with a hand-painted sign. It was making a lot of music, so I did venture in and stayed. And 9 months later, I left a position as secretary to 3 girls from college, secretary of college, and I boarded a bus with 7 other acts and a 12-piece band and performed for 94 one-nighters on the first Motown review ever in history.
What was the atmosphere and the feeling like in that building in those days? Was there a feeling of excitement that something really great was bubbling up and happening?
You know, once Berry Gordy opened his house and made it a record company, the doors never shut. You could always go there and find somebody making music. And it wasn't just amateurs. It was all like professional people who had been gathered from the city. Most of the people that were there had recorded before or had degrees in music, were accomplished arrangers, and we even had people from our Detroit Symphony Orchestra performing sessions all times of day and night, making the Motown sound. It was a beehive and full of energy and loaded with talented people.
From the outside looking in, there seemed to be a real family atmosphere within the label. Would that be right?
You can accredit it to being a family because of Berry Gordy's family. He had 3 sisters, actually 4, passed away rather early in our career. She was the first sister to pass away, but there was Gwen, Anna, and Esther, as well as Lucy. Then he had his brothers George, Bobby, and Fuller. So the whole family was there, and they were all active in the company. They were middle-class people who invested in one of the sons, Berry Gordy Jr. So it was a family. It was a family.
Yeah.
And we all got to know the family. They all helped us and assisted us in some kind of way. And Mrs. Edwards, his oldest sister, even traveled with us on our first Motown review. She was on the bus, and she was a trooper just like we were. So, yes, it did have a family effect, having his family involved. We all grew to be like brothers and sisters in the company.
Do you think the music industry today has changed so much to the point where a label like Motown with that family feel just wouldn't be able to have that sort of success in today's climate?
I think it would be very difficult to find a bunch of people who would trust and love the way that we did, and it was all because of the genius of Berry Gordy. He sort of had a keen ear for what was good, and his taste was what was approved. Nothing was done without his certification. It was not a one-man operation. However, everyone depended on his opinion, and he chose the right people to work with him. William Stevenson, the A&R director, he was better known as Mickey. He discovered me. Barry and Mickey were very close friends, and when Barry decided to leave his record store, he had a record store. He was selling jazz and blues recordings, and he decided that with Jackie Wilson being one of his first artists, that he would go into the record business. He asked his friend, who was also a singer, producer, writer, William Stevenson, to be his A&R director. William Stevenson, in turn, along with Norman Whitfield and Clarence Paul, went around to different amateur shows where I was, discovered singing in a showcase at a club called the 20 Grand. And they gave out Hitsville USA cards to different artists that they thought were qualified. And we all gathered at Hitsville USA. We had all competed on an amateur level. Prior to that, I knew the Primes and the Primettes from the Warfield Theater. But somehow we all found our way to Hitsville USA. And it was all about the taste and the talents of one Berry Gordy Jr.
Can you remember the feeling the first time you sang with the Vandellas? Was there an instant chemistry there with you and the girls?
It wasn't about the Vandellas. When I was approached by a friend who knew of a group that had one member leaving town, it was a quartet, and he asked me if I would be interested in singing with them because they were looking for the fourth girl, the second lead and second soprano. And I had been with a group called the Fascinations, and we broke up just as they recorded on Checkmate label. So when I met Gloria, Rosalind, and Annette, I had an immediate harmony. Gloria was a choir director at her church. She played piano, and she had a beautiful voice. It was similar to, if it were a combination of Aretha Franklin and Gladys Knight. She had a lot of gospel flavor and good, solid tones to her voice. She taught the harmonies, and we blended perfectly in the first days. As Delphi, we sang all over the city of Detroit at different YMCAs and Elks clubs and birthday parties, and we weren't old enough to sing in nightclubs, but we did a lot of shows, sometimes without compensation, but just the art of singing and being managed by people who were supposed to and promised us big things. The first manager, Pops Larkins, dropped us when Fred Brown came with the promise of a recording company in Chicago, a company called Checkmate Records, and the Delphis recorded a song called "I'll Let You Know." It was an answer to a song that we had backed J.J. Barnes on. That was our first recording experience. And so when I went to Motown as a single performer, I was discovered as Martha Lavelle. And when I got there, I realized that they needed backup singers for a session for this drummer named Marvin Gaye. As an A&R secretary, it's my job to make sure that people were on the set in the right place when the session was being held. So I called the girls, the Delphis, that I had previously sang with, and I asked them to come to Hitsville, USA. So we had been singing together for a while. And the minute we saw Marvin Gaye and how fine he was, we came up with that background, that doo-doo-doo, ow, stubborn kind of fella, because he was so good-looking. He had sort of, he was under the skies. Most of the time he had a hat pulled down over his eyes, and he wore sunglasses, and he kept a pipe in his mouth, so you couldn't really see. He was just on the drummer's list. But when he took that pipe out of his mouth and those glasses off his eyes and that hat off his head, he was so good-looking. We did his first album. We're featured on his first album.
Yep.
And at the same time, I had done a demonstration record for Mary Wells, who was leaving the company. And Berry Gordy, upon hearing my voice, suggested that we put the Delphis in the background and put that record out on me. I had been faithful to the company as a good secretary, and maybe after 3 months of my arrival, I finally got to meet the president and the owner of the company. And I called Annette and Rosalind and Gloria, and we sang. Gloria decided she didn't want to be a recording artist. She wanted to keep her job with the city. And eventually she dropped out. Well, we were offered a contract and a name change. I lived on the east side, and there's a street on the east side of Detroit called Van Dyke. A lot of people wonder where the name came from. Well, Della Reese was my idol. I saw her in church singing and decided that I would, since Reeves and Reeves were so close, that I would put part of her name in our group name. So Del 5, Van Dyke, Della Reese made up Vandellas.
Lovely.
So we made up the name, and we had a record out called I Have to Let Him Go, which didn't go very far. And then Holland Doja Holland sort of lended their talents to us, and we were the first recipients of a compilation of Holland Doja Holland writing team. Come and get these memories, put us in the chart, and the rest is history. I was assumed the leader of the group because I did all the singing after Gloria left, and every song that we've released since then I've sang the lead on. We were eventually called Martha the Vandellas, and in the 70s, when Berry Gordy decided to give Diana Ross her single debut and Smokey Robinson his debut from the Miracles, they put the Reeves on the back of my name, so I became Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, and he assigned the next label release as Diana Ross and the Supremes and Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. So, you know, I've had the sensation of being one of the first original hit makers at Hitsville, USA, and glad to be one of the surviving, because most of the people that I started out with have passed on.
Yeah.
It's 50 years. We're celebrating 50 years.
You mentioned Marvin Gaye, and I believe it was through Marvin Gaye that you first heard Dancing in the Street, but it was a totally different song at that point.
Oh, he was singing it as a ballad. He was like sweet, calling out around the world. Are you ready for a brand new beat, baby? You know, real sweet, like he was singing to a girl. And he asked Mickey, he said, why don't you try the song on Martha? That's what they did sometimes. They'd hear a song, and if they thought another artist could sing it, they'd give it to them, and you'd have several versions of it. But I couldn't sing it the way Marvin sang it, and when I asked if I could sing it my way, they allowed me to do that. In the first take, I thought I had it, and they told me that the machine wasn't on. So I was a little upset when I sang it the second time, but there were no stops, no dub ins, no punch ins, no punch outs. You know, sometimes when you record it, you can stop and do it over. I went straight through the song again, and I think that's why it sounds live and why it has the impact that it has, because I had to do it a second time. But it was a great song, and I just remembered Rio de Janeiro and New Orleans actually being where people had danced in the street, and that's where my imagination took me, and it proved to be the best R&B song that I've done so far in my career.
Did you have a good ear for a hit song in those days? When a song was brought to you, could you see its hit potential right away?
Yes, I have the experience of having the ability to sing a song one or two times and realize where I'll put it in my spirit and how I'll deliver it. And I was known as a one or two take artist. It didn't take me forever.
Yeah. I always thought there was something about your sound that stood it apart from the other Motown acts. I never could put my finger on it, but perhaps it was a more honest sound, a more raw sound. Did you feel that as well?
I'm from Alabama, and I got a little country thing going for me, too. I'm a little southern-minded, but I think it was my church background.
Yeah.
My grandfather was a Methodist minister. We couldn't really listen to secular music until we got in our teens. My brothers, Thomas, Benny, and I, we won candy in our churches in an amateur contest. And out of all my father's siblings, he had the only talented children. But Elijah played the guitar and sang, and Ruby idolized Billie Holiday. Having 12 children, sometimes she'd sing us to sleep. So a lot of times when I'm doing a ballad, I'm imitating my mother. You know, I think I'm the extension of their dreams. I think they wanted to be in the business. Dad used to woodshed with John Lee Hooker.
Ah.
He played the guitar, and they'd go and they'd get their corn liquor in the jar, and they'd sit there and they'd play all day sometimes. We'd have to go sometimes and get Dad and bring him home because he played the guitar so long with Johnny Hooker. But music has always been a part of our family. Dad used to rehearse his band up in the attic most Saturdays. There was always music in our house. And I know that I have a sincere love for it, and I'm still overwhelmed by our success.
Was there any competitiveness at all amongst the Motown acts?
Well, I know that if you were recording, there would always be a Motown artist at the door saying, if they can't do it, we can. There was always a competition among the writers, because Barry would give them an assignment. Barry Gordy would say, I need a record on Martha the Vandellas, and all of the writers who had an interest in getting a release on us would submit songs. We'd go in the studio and cut 4 to 5 songs, and they would all be taken to an artist development meeting. And Barry would say, okay, if you would you buy something to eat, like a hot dog, or buy this record if you only had a CD? 45s were only $1 then, only $1. And he said, would you buy a hamburger or buy this record? And he let the public choose our next release. So that was the competition. It was among the writers who would get the best song, the one that the audience would, the people would choose. He would collect people like clergymen and secretaries, the people he worked with at Ford Motor Company, parts of the family members, and he'd put them all in one room and play the records, and they decided what would go out and what was good. And we satisfied the locals before we even had a chance to have a release. So he had a good system, and the competition was with other record companies. We had songs put out by other girls' groups that I think there were lawsuits saying it was too similar to our songs, like Sally Go Round the Roses that the 3 Degrees made, and there's some other things that came out of the Philly Sound recording companies, Phil Spector. There was a lot of competition from the Memphis Sound with Motown. So it wasn't in-house competition. It was basically, if Motown was in it, Motown would win it. We had a reputation.
And in general, those Motown records of the 60s have really stood the test of time well. They don't sound dated as some other music from that period does. And I guess the fact that they were great songs has a lot to do with that, but I guess also the musicianship involved would have been very important.
Yeah, those great musicians. Like I said, everybody there was professional, and most of the musicians were arrangers. I can remember a session, one in particular, where the musicians were given chord sheets with no notes on them. Just the key, and James Jamerson would be the one who would start with his bass lines, and then the Funk Brothers, after they were formed, would come up with the rest of the song, and it always had everybody had their own space. There was no interference from the guitar where the bass was, and there was no interference with the piano where the guitar and the bass was. There was no interference with the drum beats. It seemed like everybody knew what to do. Because they were great jazz musicians, they allowed us to be heard. And they also had a system of recording. And no matter whose music they were doing, it was always different. Like our music never sounded like the Four Tops or the Temptations or the Supremes or the Marvelettes or Stevie Wonders or the Jackson 5. But it was the same musicians. Same guys, the same Funk Brothers. So it was unique that we had such great musicians.
Absolutely.
And they're holding their own now, the Funk Brothers.
When Motown moved away from Detroit, it spelt the end, the beginning of the end of your association with them. Did that really hurt you at the time?
Yes, it did, because I wasn't aware that they were leaving Detroit. It came to a surprise. I had a child, and I guess children aren't in the contract. There's no plans for motherhood. But my son was a month old when I called and asked what was my next assignment, to be told that they were leaving Detroit. So after that, my contract had expired. So I went from there to MCA Records, where I recorded with Richard Perry. And from there I went to Berkeley on Fantasy label. I did 2 albums. Then I did a solo album for Arista. So I've been basically still recording, no hits, unfortunately, but a lot of wonderful producers and a lot of wonderful songs I recorded. And I finally recorded an album of my own writings called Home to You that I will be trying to get distribution on. The business has changed. There's a new way of doing things by way of computers and online sales, but I'm still recording and still producing. And fortunately, I have a label, and I'm hoping to get my own releases out as soon as I'm done with my Detroit City Council stint. I had 4 years of politics, and I'm happy to say it's over. I'm back on the road full time now. This is back to my first career.
So 4 years was enough.
4 years? Oh yeah. Politics is another place altogether. Yeah, I'd rather be around musicians and singers.
In hindsight, do you think Motown made a big mistake leaving Detroit? Do you think it lost its identity?
No, I don't think it'll ever lose its identity. The Motown sound was stopped being manufactured, and they went to another level. Rick James and acts of his nature were not recording the Motown sound. But we had self-contained acts like the Commodores, the Jacksons, and Rick James that came and produced their own sound. They had their own. Rick James was a bassist. James Jameson had passed away. The Motown sound stopped, but the Motown sound will live forever because it was done, with such taste and such good music, and it'll be legendary, I'm sure, for a long time.
Now, during your 4 years on the council there, you were instrumental, I believe, in putting together some monuments to commemorate Motown.
We're still working on getting statues placed all over the city of Detroit with the markers to letting people know where the different artists lived, and that's something in the works. And I can do that not on the council, but there's a secondary street name, and you can find Hitsville, USA now because it's on Berry Gordy Jr. Boulevard.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do you think the city was in danger a little bit of losing sight of its musical heritage?
Yes, and with the naming of the street, a lot of people are now aware that we are still here and still functioning, and there's a move now to get some more artists discovered and find another record company, but there'll never be another Motown.
No.
There's still a lot of talent in Detroit, but Barry was unique in what he did, and he pulled himself up by his bootstraps, and that was a time when there was a depression and everybody really needed money, like Barrett Strong sang. That song, my dad really loved that song, Money. He used to play it all the time, until I got on Hitsville, USA, on the label, Gordy label. But there's a need for another company like Hitsville, USA, but it'll never be the same.
No.
We all loved Barry, and we all needed to grow together, and we did.
Now, you're coming down here as part of the Motown event with some other Motown acts, and even though it's an entirely new era now, does it still invoke memories for you of those Motown package tours of the 60s?
Oh, yeah. It's going to be a little difficult handling my solitude regarding the fact that most of the lead singers have passed away.
Yeah. I'm
working with people that are singing the songs of Eddie Kendricks and David Ruffin and Melvin Franklin and Levi Stubbs and O.B. Benson and Lawrence Payton and Florence Ballard. I'll be working with people, but the music is the same. And I still love Mary Wilson, and I still love Duke Facure and Otis Williams. So we remember good times, and we'll replicate our music, and it'll be so good for those who have been buying our music. I noticed that our music was selling in Australia early in the early 60s.
Oh, yeah.
And I always wanted to visit the country, so it's like my dream come true, and that's what I'm anticipating. my first visit to Australia.
So what can we expect to see and hear in your portion of the show?
I'm not going to tell. But I can assure you that I am the lead singer, and those are my songs, and I'll be singing me.
Fantastic. If you could go back in a time machine and talk to a young Martha Reeves just starting out on her career, what advice would you give her?
Well, I would first of all tell her to learn as much as she can about music. Motown had a 4-year course called Artist Development, and in that had I had that proper training prior to, I probably would have fared better and learned business. Mm-hmm. Please learn what business is all about. Learn to read contracts.
That's sound advice. And Martha, what are your plans after the Australian visit? What else is happening for you in 2010?
Well, since the 50th anniversary, I've noticed that there's a new interest in the Motown sound. And we were in Berlin the first of the year, first of 2009. We were in England when Michael Jackson passed away. And we've gotten my dream come true to come to Australia. It's going to be more of that. I think we'll have more foreign travel, and people are anxious to relive the Motown sound, now that it's been commemorated 50 years long last standing.
Martha, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute delight to speak to you. We're so excited that you're coming down here to see us, and we're really looking forward with great anticipation to the shows.
Thank you. Thank you. My best to Gilaski.
Pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful Christmas.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.